Okay, she already explained how should I quote it, not the 5-year plan, but the 2-hour plan, modest Stalinism, like small is beautiful Stalinism. Let's begin with small plans and so on. So I will try to do today, maybe tomorrow we'll get a little bit more fun, but today I will try to do something a little bit more connected to philosophy, precisely what you, the kind guy with the red carnation and the mustache. It's a poppy. Are you from Colombia, FARC, those drug dealing Marxists? Sorry? I know they don't do this. Yeah. Okay, but poppy is a symbol. You know that I'm the only idiot of my generation that I know who has never even tried a drug, not even a very soft drug, and so on. And I love this so much because regularly some pseudo clinicians attack me, claiming that it's obvious from all my gestures that I must be on cocaine or whatever. And did I tell you the story why I never take drugs? Because of my inner Stalinism. Like, my idea is you take drugs, you get kind, you want to dance, all the world is a flower, and then the enemy attacks and you are not ready. I'm totally fanatical here. Okay, but let's go on. So, today it is more, I hope you will be able to follow it somehow on what you, sir, the Popeye, the drug dealer guy, what you provoked me into some more philosophy. I will begin with what I already hinted at yesterday. For Lacan, for all this stuff about the center subject, subject is caused by the signifying chain, and so on, but it's not as simple as that. If you read Lacan closely, he says some things which sound almost Hegelian, some kind of, for example, the late Lacan, he says somewhere that the subject is ultimately a cause of itself. He, of course, doesn't mean it in a naive, Fichtean idealist way, although Fichte himself, again, doesn't mean it this way. But there is a certain structure which I will try to illustrate with two totally stupid, well-known, simple movie clips. What characterizes subjectivity. And it's interesting how, I think I developed this in the long chapter on brain sciences in my Parallax View book, is even they, the most positivist, but not stupid, intelligent cognitive scientists, admitted that for having the effect of subjectivity, a certain short circuit should occur, that in the causal chain you have cause-effect, but then you have a paradoxical cause, which is nothing but a retroactive effect of its own effects. And here failure intervenes. And it's this circularity which is for Lacan defining of subjectivity. What is a subject? Subject is something, as we know for Lacan, a signifier, representable. So subject is represented, or let's put it in a totally naive way, pre-Lacanian. You are a subject, you want to articulate creatively what you are, express yourself, you fail. And this failure is subject. So subject, you see this closed circuit, subject is the outcome of its own failure to be subject. Now I will try to explain this through 2-3 examples. The one is my favorite line from Hannibal Lecter novels. I think it's even from the last one, which I think is the worst one. For this very reason that I was talking about, the last one, Hannibal Rising, I think. I mean, he wrote it, the author Thomas Harris, just for money and so on. It basically was just a treatment to make a movie. But there is one nice phrase, I think it is in this novel. Some psychiatrists try to analyze Hannibal's monstrosity, they try to depict the unfortunate circumstances, traumas, and then there is a wonderful line in the novel claiming that it's wrong to ask what happened to him. The line is, nothing happened to him, he happened to the world. You know, this is a subject. Of course, things happen to you, traumas and so on. But nothing is objectively a trauma. It's always a circle. You have a cause, object A, a trauma is a cause. But this cause is always circular, is posited by the subject. Now, sorry, I almost wanted, but I'm becoming a feminist. If you were not to be a woman but a man, I would have said, where is my slave, and so on, but sorry. Okay, the first, the man who knew too much. Just look attentively at this very stupid 1 minute scene from second version of The Man Who Knew Too Much, Hitchcock. The guy, you know, whose son is kidnapped, misunderstands some news and thinks that in Ambrose Chapel, a taxidermist is looking for here, that's where they held his son. And he's perplexed. Is there something wrong here? Next one, but give me a minute, will be Superman. Yeah. It's an extremely simple point. I hope you got it. He walks along the street, James Stewart, and he is looking for what we call the Hitchcockian point of gaze. Some weird moment that sticks out and so on. But you get the point. What is the real eccentric point that sticks out? He himself. He's the strange element. You know, he's looking for the strange element in the picture, but ultimately he is the one. And this short circuit defines subjectivity. Now I will show you another clip, even more ridiculous, but I think it works. Let's just do it, because it causes me such anxiety if something will not function, so that I want to. It's from Superman 1, when Superman arrives too late and his girlfriend is killed, and then, okay, you probably know what he will do.
here for a reason.
All those things I can do, all those powers, and I couldn't even save it.
Sorry for this nonsense, but I wanted to give a very simple reading of this movie. Of course, what this scene depicts is nonsense physically, empirically. But this is the best natural embodiment of what thinking means. In thinking, you do exactly this. In thinking, you change the past. In thinking, you can do this. Not really going back and saving, but totally rereading it. You are literally changing the past in thinking. Because the past is not just what really happened, but the way we structure symbolically the past. And that's what I wanted to tell you, that this short circuit of changing the past, not, of course, at the level of facts, but at, and again, I will be making a little bit of cheap propaganda, in my new book, Disparities, I don't know if I've already mentioned this, maybe I mentioned the book, but this that I consider 2 chapters a little bit outstanding, worthy of reading. One is the 3rd chapter, where I go in detail into polemics. Probably I'm even afraid to think what will happen, how I will be attacked, and so on. A detailed debate with Robert Brandom's, which is available online, reading of phenomenology of spirit, which is, I think, a beautiful, in the sense of very consequent, the guy is not an idiot reading, but I think it's a totally wrong full domestication of Hegel. All the radical cut of Hegel disappears, and Hegel becomes a kind of Habermasian avant la lettre, preaching some kind of unconstrained communication, mutual recognition, and so on and so on. The 2nd chapter that is worth reading, I think, is the 8th one, before the last, where I go into this, what I call negative theology, and the title I like is, you know, of the chapter, like, is God unconscious, stupid, evil, or, and I introduce, but I already talked widely about it here, the notion of counterfactuals, how things are what they are. You cannot change that. What you can change is the counterfactual network against the background of which a thing is what it is, or was what it was. I'm sorry to repeat a joke, but just to make it clear, which I think I already used in this room, I would say maybe not 10 times, but 5, 6 times. You know, oh my God, I'm afraid to say, that scene from Ninochka, you know, a joke told in Ninochka. A guy goes to a cafeteria, can I have coffee without cream? The waiter says, sorry, we have no cream, we only have milk, so I can only give you coffee without milk. And it's a deeply Hegelian correct joke. The point is that the coffee is the same in both times. You will say, oh, it's coffee, it's just coffee. No, but coffee which is just coffee is not the same as coffee without cream, it's not the same as coffee without milk. Negation, and that we can change. For example, if you Let me give you a simple historical example. Something happened which was very bad for you, a big defeat. And you think it was predestined, like there was no choice, it had to happen. Wouldn't it change all your perspective if you retroactively discovered that you blew it up, that it would have been very easy for you to prevent it? Or to put it in the terms of that joke, in this way, a coffee which is just coffee, the catastrophe, would be changed into a coffee without milk, which means there could have been milk, but was not. In this sense, again, we can change the past, but also in the opposite direction. You think you have a choice, but retroactively you discover you didn't really have a choice. And here again, connecting to what Frank will talk about, I think that we should precisely reverse the usual wisdom, which is, while we are engaged in some activity, we think we have a choice. You can do this or that, but retroactively, from a historical perspective, we discover that we really didn't have a choice. For example, this would be a typical anti-communist critical reading of October Revolution. Those idiots acting at that time thought, but my God, we blew it up, we should liquidate Stalin early enough, whatever, as if there were alternatives, but as wise reactionaries like to point out, now retroactively, when we see the entire image, it is clear that there had to be Stalinism, that it was a necessary outcome. I don't agree with this, just to give you a certain logic. The idea is, again, afterwards you see there was not a choice. I claim that a much more dialectical view would have been exactly the opposite one. That while you are engaged in something, you just act and react following a certain necessity. My God, to survive, I have to do this, I have to do that. And that precisely a proper dialectical view is not to dispel this illusion of freedom and to demonstrate how it had to happen, but to bring out all the possibilities, all, again, the counterfactuals that were there, but while you were caught into action, you missed them. This is also all connected with the topic of predestination and so on and so on. Okay, we don't have time to go into this now, because now I will go into what I promised you. I will begin with a short reflection on, and please, again, more than ever, I mean it this time. Interrupt me if anything is not clear. I will simply try to articulate my answer in very simple terms to the basic problem, which is a common sense problem, but a naive question, but I think it's crucial. It deserves an answer. Why do we, by we I mean vaguely, let's call it Lacanians, people who are engaged with psychoanalysis, why do we deal with philosophy? Precisely what you asked me before. Is this a secondary application? Is there a necessary link? Because again, as you know, we get regularly attacked from both sides. A standard philosophical argument is the transcendental one, which means you find it in Habermas, in Heidegger already in a different way. The idea is that in spite of all restraints, qualifications, psychoanalysis is simply an ontic-specific empirical procedure dealing with a very specific phenomenon, psychic troubles. Okay, it provides a certain image of human psyche, but as such, not only it cannot have any direct philosophical relevance, but it even always already has to rely on a certain philosophical pre-understanding. For example, don't underestimate this logic. It has a certain immanent necessity in it. For example, isn't it true that when Freud analyzed the psyche, he had to rely on a certain set of notion, preconception of causes, effects, and so on. Studies are written on how Freudian theory of libido relies on this mechanicistic notion of energy, conservation of energy, and so on and so on. So this is the classical philosophical argument against the autonomy of sciences, that, for example, even quantum physics, to do its job, it has already to presuppose a certain conceptual network. And you cannot be a radical empiricist and say, no, it's through studying, doing its experiments, exploring its matter, that it discovers new notions of causality and so on and so on. It does, but nonetheless, in its basic approach to reality, it has already to rely on certain concepts of what is causality and so on and so on, and you cannot get out of this circle. You are never at a zero level where you just look at reality. So again, we have the philosophical reproach to psychoanalysis. It might be interesting, it might even have some secondary philosophical consequence, iceberg that we see, but mostly when philosophers recognize this, they take it in a very naive way. They claim, okay, what does psychoanalysis prove? That we are not just pure rational beings, that stupid metaphor that I think should be prohibited, of how the iceberg and the unconscious is the bigger part of the iceberg that we don't see, we see just the ego and so on. But then every philosopher will tell you what's so new about it. You have long tradition in the 19th century of irrationalism, from late Schelling, Schopenhauer, even the term Unbewusste, wasn't it? Who was that idiot? Hartmann, or who wrote a big book on unconscious in the middle of on 19th century. So again, well before Freud, you have a wide reflection. Human being, our reason is just a puppet of some unconscious drives and so on and so on. So you can show, although I totally reject it, but it's easy to show in an immanent philosophical way that for Freud to do his job, many things already had to happen in our basic pre-understanding of what is reality. Certain notion of irrationality, of the limitation of our reason, and so on, all that. So Lacan, this is one target of psychoanalysis, that it's not simply strong enough. It may be interesting, but it has to rely on certain philosophical presuppositions, preconceptions that it cannot ground out of itself. Then we have the opposite reproach from some Lacanians, clinicians, that the real in psychoanalysis, the only real is clinique, patients, and so on. And that what we are doing, by we I mean people who are not clinicians, we are simply ultimately playing cultural games, applying psychoanalysis, and so on. But these are only after effects. Cultural gains may be an interesting thing, but irrelevant if it's not directly grounded in clinical experience. Against both this, I'm sorry that my Stalinism will explode again, this right-wing and left-wing deviation, I think that the correct Stalinist Lacanians, my God, way that from the Lacanian standpoint, Lacan's axiom, il n'y a pas de rapport sexuel, there is no sexual relationship, is not an axiom which only underlies human sexuality, determining it as fundamentally antagonistic. And incidentally, even here, Lacan is often misread. Even Jacqueline Miller sometimes, I think, gets lost. For example, when he says that il n'y a pas de rapport sexuel can also be read as that they are out of sync, the two sexes. That, for example, it's once he even uses this, for me, very vulgar, totally inappropriate metaphor, that like masculine sex is like a key, but you don't ever find what do you thrust the key into? Lock, how do you call it? Keyhole, yes, the keyhole never fits it, which for me it's a little bit too vulgar to go, and because I think it's totally wrong, you know, as proper Lacanians demonstrate, this reading of the two sexes is always in a permanent conflict, never harmony, and so on and so on. This is not at all what Lacan means. This, to use the horrible, terrifyingly bad bestseller, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. This is no. The whole point of Lacan is not that we have the two sexes as constituted and then they always miss each other and so on, but that each of the two sexes cannot be constituted in itself. Woman cannot be a woman, man cannot be a woman. The gap, the impossibility is not between the two sexes, but it's immanent, inherent in each of the sexes. So again, Lacan's "there is no sexual relationship" is an axiom with radical ontological implication, an axiom which posits the antagonistic, incomplete, flawed, whatever, character of reality itself, the impossibility to grasp it as a whole. And subjectivity can only arise in a reality which is ontologically incomplete, traversed by an impossibility. This also means for Lacan, I will try to demonstrate this, now I'm just positing the axioms, that subject is immanently, constitutively sexed. It's not enough to say that subject emerges when substance is non-all, antagonistic, inconsistent. The mediating term is here sexuality. In order to have subject, the antagonism, impossibility that cuts across reality has to acquire a form of sexuality, of the impossibility of the sexual relationship. So, how do I develop this? What do I mean by this? Let's begin with Kant, from Kant to Hegel. Why is for Lacan Kant at the beginning of it all? I'm, of course, here relying on the path-breaking study, and it's very strange how totally ignored it is, by John Kopjek, The Euthanasia of Reason, which it's typical how I organized in publishing the book The Not To by Lorenzo Chiesa, who is also recently it appeared by MIT, who is also a polemic by me and so on. He mentions a little bit Alenka Zupancic, but it's so strange. It's a book which is all about Lacan's formula of sexuation, and John Kopjek, I think it's not even mentioned there. It's in a very weird way how her text, which is for me one of the absolute great texts, is ignored. So let me try to develop this. In the predominant perception, Kant is perceived as someone who openly admitted the failure of general ontology, an ontology which aims at grasping the whole of reality. This is Kant's big revolution. You know, if you know a little bit of Kant, we don't have time to go into details now, Kant's basic hypothesis is that, axiom even, that when our mind tries to grasp all of reality, not just limited experience that we have, temporal experience, but if we try to extrapolate from what we see here, from what we can test, how all of reality is structured, we not only fail, but we get caught into what Kant calls antinomies. And there is no primitive Hegelian dialectics in it. It's not that, it's this and that, let's do a synthesis. For Kant, these are radical antinomies, in the sense of, like, is there a free will, or is all of reality totally determined by natural laws? Kant's position is a radical antinomy. We can logically prove with impeccable reasoning both versions. And then, I will not give, just Google Kant's concepts or whatever, Kant lexicon, you get this explained in a simple way better than I can emphasize. How all the big, does the world, the universe, reality that in which we dwell, does it have a temporal beginning or a limit in space or not? Again, Kant's point is, the moment we overstep our empirical experience and try to think reality as totality, as an all, we necessarily get caught into contradictions. And all other, so freedom of the will, also the elements like, is reality divisible ad infinitum, or do we arrive at some minimal parts, atoms? Again, Kant's point is antinomy. Now comes, I'm just trying to reconstruct for you, this will not be proofs, the reasoning that's behind what I perceive as philosophical relevance of psychoanalysis. So we have this Kantian situation, antinomies. Kant distinguishes two types of antinomies, so-called mathematical antinomies, which are the antinomies of quantitative antinomies, when we are dealing with too much excessive quantities which are beyond our perception, and so-called qualitative or dynamic antinomies, which are concerned with qualitative difference, like, I don't know, is there a free will, is there God, or whatever. The shock of John Cobject was to discover that these two antinomies, quantitative antinomies, dynamic antinomies, and mathematical antinomies, exactly fit, and it's shocking that Lacan never writes this, was not aware of it, exactly fit Lacan's formulas of sexuation. In other words, what are for Kant mathematical antinomies, all or non-all, is are structured like what Lacan calls the deadlock, antagonism of feminine sexuality, what Kant calls dynamic antinomies, which are structured exactly like what Lacan calls masculine antagonism, which is universality and its constitutive exception, and so on and so on. So that's the big breakthrough of John Cobject. Just to establish this link, that Kant was struggling for years. If you look seminars which come before Encore, before the 20, he was struggling for years trying to formulate precisely these formulas of situation, but what he arrived at the end is exactly Kant's antinomies of pure reason. Which is why, in my new book that I'm just finishing, there is a chapter of antinomies of pure sexuation, because this is what Lacan is doing. Okay, so what's then the problem with Kant? Here, I think what is crucial is to accomplish a passage from Kant to Hegel. Because for Kant, the ultimate deadlock is an epistemological one concerning knowledge. Antinomies are for Kant just antinomies of our knowledge. Kant posits a reality in itself which cannot be antinomic. Things are what they are out there, but we cannot get to know them. When we try to understand all of it, we get with our limited human mind, we get necessarily caught into antinomies, which is for Kant a proof that reality is unknowable to us. And things get here, with regard to ethics, incredibly interesting. Because then Kant asks the question, I often quoted this passage, he asks the question, my God, how time is running, I hate life. He asks the question in his Critique of Practical Reason, but why? Why did God create the world in such a stupid way that we cannot get to know external reality the way it really is? And Kant gives an extremely radical, interesting answer for ethical reasons. If we were to be able to know how reality really is, ethics would not have been possible. Because we would simply know how things are, and if there is God, we would act ethically, but not really. Because for Kant, as you know, a real ethical act is when you do it just for the sake of duty. But if we were to know reality, then we would have known, if I act well, I will be maybe not punished, but rewarded by, and so acting ethically would simply become a matter of calculation. I act ethically because I know I will be punished in my afterlife. So again, but let's go a step further here to see all the shocking dimensions. So Kant remains antinomies at the epistemological level. As Hegel puts it so nicely, Kant shows too much tenderness for the things, for reality. For Kant, if there is an antinomy, it means we don't know how things really are. Antinomies are always a sign of the limitation of our reason. In other words, to return, if you can prove that the universe is at the same time illimited and finite, or if you can prove that there is universal determinism, but at the same time there is free will, this means that simply there is something wrong in your logic. Wrong in the sense that it doesn't fit reality, that we are unable to understand the way things really are. Now, the greatness of Kant here, he is very radical, is that for him, this is not just a limitation of certain class, epoch, whatever, but antinomies are, for Kant, constitutive of human reason as such. Now, the move from Kant to Hegel is a very radical one. It's not a return to naive ontology, like, no, we can get to know the way things really are in themselves. Hegel's gesture is a very crazy, radical one. And that's why, incidentally, I don't like, although it's beautifully written, Brandom's analysis, because I think his entire effort is to domesticate Hegel. He takes Hegel's most daring paradoxical statements and domesticates them. It's really as if showing, don't be afraid, Hegel is not really such a bad guy. We can read it as, I think this is even the subtitle of the first subchapter, I think, that how, in defense of Hegel's madness, like you have all these crazy statements in Hegel, not necessary to repeat them, and Brandom's effort is to say, don't worry, we can translate all that into our ordinary language, and we can but okay, Hegel's view, I'm sorry if I will repeat old stuff here, I will repeat two old stories, each of them I already repeated in this room again, these ones maybe even 10 times, but just to make it clear, because now I'm dealing with really the very focus of what I'm trying to do. Hegel's move is not simply to claim, no, we can move over Kant and know reality. Hegel's claim is much more radical one. It's that the antinomy, which for Kant, in Kant's view, prevents our contact with reality, is the very point where we can touch the real outside. Let me give you two examples that I used, the first one 15 times, I would say, in my books, but it's so clear. I'm sorry if many of you know it. This would be a clear-cut case. Adorno, in his text on notion of society, I think, claims, but let's forget about the example, think about the logic. He claims how any notion of society in our world oscillates between, in sociology he means, Adorno, between the two extremes. Either we are individualists and try to develop how society emerges as a spectra, objectified, reified phantom out of concrete interaction of individuals. Or we are more Durkheimian organicists, and we try to develop how society comes first as objective field of social interactions, and how individuals emerge in a specific epoch of social life out. So either you are individualist or you are, how should I call it, organicist, holist. And Adorno first radicalizes this into an antinomy. He says, there is no synthesis here. You know, Adorno is here nonetheless bright. He's totally opposed to this pseudo-dialectical idea. No, this is one extreme, there is another extreme. But what about a dialectical interaction where there is society, but nonetheless this society as objective field involves individuals or whatever? He doesn't buy this bullshit. He says the antinomy is irreducible. But no way to include two extremes, individualism and holism, into a kind of a global view where each of them would have its place. No. His idea is, no, we always fail to construct a unified notion of society. We always get caught into an antinomy. And it's so simple, I'm sorry if you know it. Adorno's solution is, you know what? It is, but this very antinomy is the basic feature of today's society. Today's modern society is characterized, just think about our world. On the one hand, we are individualized again and again. The whole ideological machinery individualizes us because it's part of the moralization of the existing social order. For example, I think I often use this example. Take ecology. How does ideology work in ecology? To tell you, don't criticize society. Think about your part in it. Did you recycle all the Coke cans? Did you put aside, this false superego individualization? Also, did you notice how the more our society is global and impenetrable, chaotic in its economic processes and so on, the more we are addressed as radically responsible, like we are condemned to freedom. This is all the second modernity, Giddens stuff, and so on, New chances of freedom, the story, I'm often repeating it, Like, you complain, I cannot even get a permanent job, and then you are immediately accused of being afraid of freedom. Can't you see that the inability to get a permanent job means that a new freedom is open to you, a freedom to reinvent yourself creatively every year again and again? So intelligent sociologists get this out. This extreme hedonist individualism today is strictly the obverse of the fact that global social process or economic is becoming more and more totally impenetrable. Just think about 2008 crisis. Apart from there were some leftist, but even some intelligent rightist economists, it was a mega shock for the majority. Nobody saw it coming. It's incredible how little, I really think, it's not an exaggeration that economists today, especially macroeconomists, are basically magicians. This is a return to magical thinking. They don't know what... I remember how I learned this. Varoufakis invited me 3 years ago. Now probably he is too high. I appreciate him. I don't despise him. That's my bad joke. Before he became Varoufakis, the media person, he invited me. He told me, why don't we write a book together on economy? I told him, but listen, whatever I write about economy, I bluff. I don't have any idea of it. And Varoufakis answered, but do you think that we economists know it? We're doing exactly the same. Nobody knows it. No. So again, you see the beauty don't disappear, soon you will have a duty. And now I will play Donald Trump to, where are you going? To the toilet? Disgusting, what are you doing? You know, I mentioned this yesterday, Donald Trump to, you are my Hillary now. Yeah. Okay, sorry, let's go on. But you see the beauty of Adorno's solution. The very thing that appeared as a problem, my God, we get into an antinomy, becomes its own solution. Because this antinomy, this radical, never reconciled split into extreme individualism and impenetrable objectivity is the fundamental real feature of society today. This is the proper, how to put it, step from Kant to Hegel. Hegel does not resolve Kantian antinomies. There is no step further into a higher dialectical synthesis or whatever. He just reinterprets the obstacle, what appears as the obstacle, as its own solution. Without getting this, you don't get anything in Hegel. For example, that's why Hegel is not a thinker of reconciliation in the sense that things looks back, but then, through some wonder, they get reconciled. No. It's a crucial passage, I quoted already in my previous book, Absolute Recoil, where Hegel says that the reconciliation is always a retroactive movement. The Hegelian reconciliation is not a, Frank, if you are back now, if you want me to shake your hands, I cannot resist. Did you wash your hands afterwards so that I can... You see, my formula is this one. When we fight for communism, there are no moralist limits or limits of bourgeois taste. We should go to the... Sorry, but let me go on. And then I will give you the most beautiful example, which I repeat in just 5-6 of my books, but just to make a point and then conclude and give the word to Genosse Ruda. That eternal example that I've written, you must even know the graph, so that you get the point. You know, my favorite Lévi-Strauss in Structural Anthropology, Volume 1, Do Dual Organizations Exist? I think this is breathtaking. Lévi-Strauss, don't dismiss him as an early stupid structuralist. He was a genius. It's such a simple story. I'm sorry if you know it, but just again to get the point. He visited certain stupid tribe, I don't know where, and he there asked them to draw the map of their village. And he noticed how he got from half of the tribe one image and from the other half another image. Some members of the tribe draw the image like this. Here in the center is the central temple, and then houses in a circle around. The other half wrote a totally different image. It's as if cut, divided by a line. The temple is here on the one side with some important houses, ordinarily small houses, huts on the other side. Now, of course, the question is, but there must be a real disposition of houses. How are the houses really disposed? And so what do you see when you hire a helicopter and take a photo from above? The result is neither of the two. Some mixture and so on. But then Lévi-Strauss does something wonderful. He says that this very contradiction, half of the people see the houses like this, the other half like that, it's wrong to compare it with reality and to say, you see, they exaggerate in one sense, the others in another sense, but the real disposition of houses is somewhere in the middle. No, Lévi-Strauss sees the element of truth about this tribe in this very caricature opposition, because he says, in a very beautiful analysis, he shows how this tribe was in the middle of passing from egalitarian pre-class society into already first forms of hierarchy. And then he demonstrated how those who were losing on the lower side perceived the class struggle. They gave the mapping where on the one side are the privileged priests and so on, we, the poor suckers, are on the other side. Of course, as is always the case, the rich, the new ruling class, perceived itself, of course, as we are the harmonious center, which, and so on and so on. So, you see, Lévi-Strauss then makes a wonderful point that it's wrong to ask about the two images, two maps, which is the true one. The truth about the tribe is the very antagonism of the two images. This tells you the truth. So the very problem, the very antinomy brings you close, gives you the... So you got here the basic part. So again, let's go on. So to conclude briefly, obviously we will have to do much more philosophy tomorrow, but I promise you something. I will keep my word. You still have the emails of the guys here. I will give you my usual word, which at least there I usually was not lying, no? I will send you tomorrow some files, so that what I will not be able to deliver here, you can get them if you want, the text. Because as always, you know, fuck you, I never prepare classes for you. I use the stuff from my new book, no? So you can get it. Okay, let's go on. So that's then the idea of Lacan, that in the same way that Hegel draws the ontological consequences of Kantian antinomies, which means that it's not only that our epistemology, our knowledge of reality gets caught into antinomies, but it reproduces an antinomy which is in the very core of what is reality. Reality is profoundly antinomic. And for Lacan, in this sense, sexual antagonism is the privileged way to get at this. Therein resides, as you can see in Kant again, the ontological consequence of sexual antagonism. Sexuality is not just a distortion of us sexed beings, but a signal, an after effect of how reality itself is antagonistic. You know, this eternal problem, now I'm moving in a very general way, of what is reality? Is it, you know, all these antinomies in quantum physics? It's particles, it's waves, if this or that. The psychoanalytic ontology, as it were, would have been that. There is no ontology, there is no reality in the sense of one big reality which is just flat, and then secondarily antinomies intervene. Reality in itself is radically antinomic. Antinomic in precisely the sense that philosophy, which wants to be traditional ontology, depicting all of reality with such fundament and so on, some fundament, always by definition fails. Which is why, that's my problem with Lacan's terminology, when he says, je m'insurge contre la, I raise myself against philosophy. Well, fuck you, all the philosophy is doing this from Kant onward, you know. Like, Kant already refuses for what he is doing the term philosophy. He says it's just prolegomena, transcendental preparation of philosophy. Fichte, Schelling in the same way. Hegel, he said it's not philosophy, it's Wissenschaft, it's knowledge. Marx, Nietzsche, no philosopher after Kant wants to be a philosopher, except this new ontology, new materialism now, and so on. It's quite incredible how philosophy after Kant, inclusive of Kant, is defined as anti-philosophy. In no way can you take Hegel as a positive ontologist. Hegel is not an ultra-rationalist who paints some rational structure harmonious of the universe. No. What Hegel does is just going from antinomy to antinomy, from a failure to a failure. But it's not just a limitation of our knowledge. The crazy thesis, again, is that the absolutely crucial moment here, again, is this passage from epistemology to ontology, you get caught into an epistemological deadlock. And then the properly dialectical solution is not to overcome the deadlock, but to demonstrate how what you thought separates you from reality, this deadlock, is precisely what includes you into the very core of reality. And as I repeatedly try to develop in my books, this and only this is the reason why I consider myself an atheist Christian. Because as Chesterton put it so nicely, Gilbert Keith Chesterton, in every religion you have atheists. Every religion admits there are people who don't believe in God. Maybe he is wrong, but I'm just reporting you his position. Only in Christianity we have that famous Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, Father, why have you forsaken me? We have, for a brief moment, God himself who no longer believes in God. You know, this is the Christian solution. In a traditional religion, now you will see the link with what I was saying, in a traditional religion we are abandoned by God. And then, through some, I don't know, God's grace, or from our side, hard work, we try to fill in the gap. Christian message is totally different. It is, yes, we are abandoned by God. But at that very point, when we feel totally abandoned by God, we identify with Christ on the cross, who feels abandoned. The very abandonment by God, being abandoned by God, is just an effect of God being radically separated from itself. Okay, I will be honest. I hope this was not too confused. Tomorrow I will draw some more consequences from this, and then I will do something totally crazy. I hope you will swallow it. I will try to give you a simple musical example of this logic of void supplement. I will follow the dialectic, very simple, of background and melody, Pachelbel canon. Then what happens in Mozart? You know how something that for Pachelbel was already a musical piece in itself, all of a sudden with Mozart starts to function as a background and needs to be filled in with melody. And then I will go into this gap which you wonderfully fill in Mozart between main melodic one line, which is in Mozart always thwarted, blocked, but the beautiful effect is, that's why at the end of a piece, typically in Mozart, it's as if what was thwarted explodes in an unexpected, excessive finale. While I will try to prove the ultimate origin of kitsch is Beethoven. Because he goes into this full romantic horror of bringing the melody out to its full culmination. For example, one of the greatest pieces of musical kitsch for me, if you know, is Beethoven's the most famous overture, Leonore Dry, the third, Leonore 3 to Fidelio. No? It's kitsch, and then I will go, it's something so simple. I will try just to, I will shock you to give you now, how do you call it, a teaser for joy. My basic point will be, did you see, it's shitty movie, the scene, did you see You Only Live Twice, the fourth or fifth James Bond movie, the fifth? Okay, in Japan. There is a wedding scene there which perfectly encapsulates this typical Western moment of, first you have this restrained pseudo-Oriental music, and then you have big release, full melody with violins and so on. And it's, I think, a wonderful, the most colonialist moment in music that I can imagine. And so I hope you will be able to swallow that. But now, enough of this. Deutschland nimmt über. Germany takes over now. Please. Okay, is it okay if you are like this? Okay.
So first of all, I want to thank Slavoj for making this possible and for the endorsement which started years ago, and I'm sure he's from the very beginning regretted it. I wanted to say that. Also, yesterday you proposed an honorary membership, maybe not a job, but an honorary membership in the Slovenian gang. I heard that my last name in Slovene has something to do with mining, so maybe there's a proletarian position open. I would apply. And thanks for bearing with me as a committed fatalist, and I want to argue that you should be too. I expect this is a huge disappointment already, so I mean, it can only get better. So I was supposed to say something about my new book, which is called Abolishing Freedom, a plea for a contemporary use of fatalism, and it's a book on freedom, but why give it such an unappealing title? Abolishing Freedom does not sound very charming or even more so like a very defensible program at all. The basic argumentative move of the book is fourfold. First, it starts from a very trivial observation, namely that the signifier freedom does not at all necessarily and always mean what it seems to say. To put it trivially, not every time someone refers to freedom for justifying what he or she does, one actually encounters freedom in a meaningful way in the consequence. Let me give you a stupid empirical, yet quite, I think, telling recent example, namely what happened more or less recently with the American company Virgin Enterprise. They claimed that having a prescribed number of vacation days, annual vacation days, is ultimately somehow unproductive and very repressive for their employees. They themselves should freely decide how often they think they need a leave, freeing them from all external constraints, authoritarian and pre-given rules, and so forth. This was also presented as being very much up to date. I quote their website. First time I ever do this. Flexible working has revolutionized how, where, and when we all do our jobs. So if working 9 to 5 no longer applies, then why should strict annual leave vacation policies, unquote. And one should note that this would also work as a slogan for working from 9 to 9 and abolishing vacation altogether, I think. But nonetheless, of course, there was a condition that came along with this project. Holidays can only be taken when the work is done, and the employees are considered to be the ones to know when that is. When that happened, what then happened was that the number of taken holidays effectively got lower than ever in the company's history. There emerged immediately an internal super-egoic pressure of self-control, which proved more oppressive than the prior external regulations. This was an effect of the employees supposedly freely deciding about when and how much holiday they need, and the effect was that the competition among the employees kicked in even harsher when external administration was suspended. So freedom, their freedom to decide about their own vacation, did actually lead into even more determination, which was even less to be influenced. One may also think of examples analyzed and just referred to by our master, Slavoj Žižek. People these days, and if you work in a university, I mean, he just referred to that, you know what I'm talking about, do not find a long-term employment, and this is presented to them as a chance to explore ever new options, be creative, and things like that. Or think of what the conservatives in the US articulated as one argument against universal health insurance. The freedom of not being obliged to have a state-guaranteed one was presented as freedom from state control, etc. So the first intuition behind the book is that at least the signifier freedom can function in a way that effectively leads to unfreedom or non-freedom. And this may lead to a particular form of what Alain Badiou calls disorientation. Disorientation because one may be all for freedom and effectively endorse something that has nothing to do with freedom whatsoever. But this is the starting question of the book. What if and what to do when the signifier freedom becomes a synonym of oppression, even though a perfidious one? Because how could one not be for freedom? Even against better insight, freedom is nothing anyone would like to give up, not even when it's de facto already gone. This is where its disorienting and, I think, oppressive quality becomes apparent. And it's a not very, let's say, attractive position to say that freedom as such has an oppressive quality. I know that. And it also works somehow because it works somehow like the holy cow of Western civilizations, maybe with democracy, and the prospect of criticizing it or even giving it up seems highly unattractive. But I think at least today it's not enough to constantly appeal to its true meaning. which is at the same time and by far not undisputed, I guess. Already Marx noted that freedom is a crucial component of the functioning and dynamics of capital. Just think of what he writes in Capital, namely that within the Eden, that is the legal framework on which capitalist forms of production rely, I quote, "there alone rule freedom, equality, property, and Bentham." Freedom is for Marx part of a series of signifiers which gains its ultimate consistency by adding to it another term of a fundamental different quality, namely Bentham, the utilitarian philosopher. And this adding, this supplement, this suturing is crucial. It is his name on which the consistency of the series hinges and which starts to determine what the respective concepts de facto mean. Freedom then does in this context, for example, not only frame the free exchange between two equals, the laborer and the capitalist, the former freely selling his labor power, the latter freely buying it, and both are presented as if they are determined by their equally free wills only, but Marx, by adding Bentham to the series of concepts, also marks that their free will is determined by that which Bentham stands for, pure calculating self-interest. This is what holds together, in a certain sense, and determines the series of terms. So in this example, it seems one is dealing with an actualization of freedom, but ultimately, this only obfuscates the fact that there is a straightforward determination that models and frames the very way in which freedom is actualized, and also what can count as an actualization of freedom. So effectively, it's not freedom that Marx is talking about, right? So when and if freedom effectively functions as a disorienting instrument of oppression, freedom is not something that one should endorse no matter what. This is the starting reflection somehow. But that this seems so difficult, if not impossible to do, shows that it's a peculiar, I would say, contemporary fetish, something that one should better not touch. So my question was how to problematize an oppressive function of something you better should not touch. This leads me to my second point, and this is, if you wish, another trivial observation, namely that one can find in the history of modern rationalist philosophy, maybe even before, but beginning at least with Descartes and going through thinkers like Kant, Hegel, Marx, and others, a fundamental problematization of misleading and inconsistent notions of freedom. And the one that stands out, the one that is sort of the most problematic, and at the ground of most, if not all, misconception, is the understanding of freedom in terms of and as being a capacity. When freedom is taken to be a capacity that we as human beings, or whatever the agent is, have, it is usually taken to be a capacity to choose, or is fashionable to say these days, to determine oneself, which means to choose what one thinks, what one wants to do and be.